Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Touchpoint Group Banking App Insight session. And for 2023, we have made another great change to this. After requests from many of you in the banking community, we're going to combine the data sets and we're going to look at the entire US market. And we will be able to change things up a little bit and have a look at it and drill down into each of the different areas. But Tony, you've done a fantastic job yet again of innovating this insight session and looking forward to seeing how things play out across the entire market in the US.
Great, thank you, Glenn. Yeah, as Glenn mentioned, we're covering off the US nationals, US tier ones, and US regionals together just to see how they stack up against each other. So a fair bit of benchmarking throughout this presentation. So let's move forward into it and look at our standard look. We looked at this the end of last year or in January just to see what's happened across last year to start with. So give us some context before we step into what's happened in January. So some of the big things we saw was, of course, there's these three at the top: US Bank, Citibank, and Capital One, sitting there consistently, sort of well into the fours, and for US Bank, sort of nearing five. So very, very positive for the top three here. We see some movements though down lower. For example, TD hit slightly softening at the end of 2022. Let's see what happened into 2023. And also we can see that Fifth Third has dropped away in November, December. And we know why that happened last time because of the app update. But let's also have a look at that. What's the impact into January as well? How has that moved forward? And also we'll see how the movements of the remaining banks have gone as well. So let's step forward and see what's going on. So now one of the things we can't do is show you all of those banks at once, although they're all available in this data set. But one of the things is there's too many things going on at that point. So let's have a look to start with about these here. So we've got Capital One, PNC, Truist, and US Bank. Now, one of the things I can see here is PNC was on the rise. So basically, you could have predicted potentially at the end, November last year, it could have sort of hit Capital One if it increased that level. But it's now down to around 3.5 for 2 months in a row. So they're struggling a bit there, but they need to obviously pick themselves up back to where they were in October, November. Probably they can just check back what version of the app was there and then update things from there. We can also see Truist has, again, that's on the rise as well. That's doing very well in terms of that movement. Had that dip in November and October, but it's really pushed up above 4. So again, there's potential again for Truist to lift itself up to that next level into Capital One, which both PNC and Truist haven't done for a very long time. And of course, US Bank is always along the top here. This is our global benchmark leader, so very positive still for US Bank. What I can do though is to switch across. Now, what I'll do with this score as well is just explain, I'll just jump into US Nationals here and apply that. So of course, this score, for those who have watched this series for a while, this score is what's called the engaged customer score. So what we're looking at here is those customers who've given both a score and a comment. And what the power of that is that when you get a score and a comment, we know exactly what needs to change to improve, for example. So we know why the movements are happening. And that's the power of what's sitting inside here, that every person here has also given a comment. So let's have a look here at what's going on. So Wells Fargo, we've seen that for a long time, that dip in March. But that's recovered up to the levels it was in January last year. So hopefully they can move forward because they have made changes to the UI, and hopefully they can move forward again and lift themselves up to that level of around 4. One of the things we saw was of course Chase was had that up and down movement. But what we're seeing here is that it's actually dipped down into November, and it hasn't really recovered from that yet. It's moving in the right direction, but it's still struggling. So interesting as to what's happening there. Now, one of the other things which we'll look at in a moment is Discover Financial. We haven't focused on that before, but it does very well. In fact, it's sitting there in amongst the top 3 or 4 in the US. But you can see there it's actually struggled over the past sort of 8 months or so, where it hasn't got above that 4.5. When I say struggled, it's doing very well, but it was doing better previously. And of course, Bank of America sitting there in a similar spot as well. So we'll come back to Discover Financial and also Citibank in a moment. So one look also in here is looking at the regionals. So let's bring these in. So in a moment, we'll also do some benchmarking against all of these as well on various topics. So a lot of change going on inside here, a lot of sort of action. Now, one of the things we'll look at in a moment is Fifth Third, and that's dropped away and it's maintained that low point. Obviously, on a scale of 1 to 5 from the App Store and Android stores, the lowest you can get is 1. You can't get below 1 because it's the lowest score there. They're sitting at around 1.3 odd, around there somewhere. So obviously there's trouble for customers sitting there as well. Now, one of the things we saw was TD had softened at the end of last year, sort of dropped away. That hasn't gone down any further, which is good, but there's still recovery room left for them. They're still in January sitting at 2.75, whereas, as you can see, they were sitting up around 4 in the most of last year. So what I'll do now is just have a look. We saw that Fifth Third had dropped away in the last 3 months, has dropped away because of that app update. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to look at what are the numbers we've got here across our surf analysis. So just so you're aware what the surf analysis is, it's looking at these 4 key areas of pain points. So these are all problem areas. So security and authentication, usability, reliability, and functionality. So where are the problems coming through here? So one of the things we can see is that in that last 3-month period, functionality issues were at 47.8%, so 48% issues. And that's gone up from the 3 months prior to that, where the app release hadn't happened, by 20 points. So it was at around 27, it's got up towards 50 now. So it's a big jump. The biggest jump though is usability. It's gone up by 28 points from the previous 3-month period. So that's a massive leap into what's going on there. So actually it's good to see actually what's going on. So one of the things we can see, if I go into usability, one of the things we can see inside that, just on the right, when this right panel comes up. So on here, usability, we can see some app difficult to use has gone from about 6% up to 26%. So a big jump. So let's see what's inside that. We can actually see what's going on for these customers. So on the right, we can see pretty much a lot of it's around the update. There's an app update, difficult to use. It's difficult to use, make it more user-friendly. So in essence, there's a really big issue with that app update. So you somehow managed to make the app even more confusing. I hate having to click an extra step. So it seems like there's a lot of extra process for customers to go through to get through into what they're trying to achieve. So that's interesting. So that's probably pretty clear to Fifth Third. But what might not be as clear, if we have a look across this functionality area, there's a few other things going on. So obviously things like poor app navigation's also gone up from about 0.4% to about 3.6%. But other things are also popping up. So for example, poor app widget feature. Now again, this is only little murmurings of what's going on here. But again, there are people here saying, I can't see my available balance on the widget screen. Bring back the ability to add a widget to check our balances. So they've taken some functionality away, and customers don't like that. They're clearly having a problem. And I've also seen issues with speed as well. So underlying these UI things, there's also other things going on. So hopefully Fifth Third can get a grasp on what's happening there. So let's move away from Fifth Third for a moment. And then onto these two here. So Discover Financial is sitting there nicely, but it's always behind Citibank. So let's actually isolate those two. Let's have a look what's going on in there. So essentially we can see there's a gap. Now it's not much of a gap, but it's continuous. There's always a gap between the two across the past year. Let's understand why that's happening. So what I'll do with that is move into looking at our surf analysis. So remember here, lower is better. We want a lower frequency of these problems coming through. So for the first view here, you can see Discover Financial in blue here is actually higher overall compared to Citibank. So very interesting. But is that bad? So we can see reliability is 8.9. And if I click on that there, and on the right panel, what we can see there is this is the ranking across all the banks across the US that we're covering in this particular data set. And remember, lower is better. So US Bank is performing the best. They only have 5% of their customers in the past few months, or this is looking at over the past year, actually mentioning anything about reliability issues. So 5% is really, really good. Discover Financial is only about 9, so that they're good as well. They're in that top 5, so very, very positive as compared to others, which are sort of getting more than a third of their customers talking about reliability issues. So very, very strong. And similarly for authentication and security, so logging in type area issues. Let's have a look at how these two compare to the market. So again, we've got Discover Financial sitting there at number 4 in terms of best at the bottom here. US Bank at only 1% mentioned login issues. So it's a very, very positive for them. But again, Discover Financial is doing very well, even though it hasn't quite caught up to Citibank. So this is interesting. This is just these pain points. But how are they doing across journeys? So this view here is looking at the past 5 months, looking at, now what I might do here, I might just switch this to just look at Citibank. So across the past 5 months, how is Citibank and Discover Financial compared to each other? Now again, we're switching here. This one here, a higher score is better. So this is looking at the ratings of those customers discussing these topics around, for example, checking account balance, monitoring account activity, paying bills, depositing checks, for example, all the basic functions you want out of an app. How well are these banks performing? We see there Citibank is above Discover on everything. They're doing very well on everything. So it's only a small gap. So it's just a small improvement from Discover to actually get to that level. Now, one of the things we can see here is it's actually, Discover is actually a fair bit lower than Citibank for check deposit. So I think there's some improvement things there that Discover can do. Now, one of the things we can also do, instead of comparing Discover to Citibank, we can compare Discover to all of that US market we've seen and see how do they compare in each of these things. So Discover is doing very well across all of these measures. So basically checking account balance, monitoring account activity, all the basic stuff, except on the right here, we can see depositing a check via the app is actually underperforming compared to the market. So Discover Financial can improve there to bring that score up to a higher level. And again, we can actually see in here how Discover Financial ranks compared to others. Let's have a look at that in our benchmarking on the right. So what we can see there is that the best of the bunch up here is US Bank, Wells Fargo, Citibank, doing very well on check deposits, but Discover Financial's down at 13th. So some room to improve for them there, definitely. So a fair few things there covered, Glenn, but I think there's some room for even those near the top to actually get up to that next level. There's always something to find to improve.
Yeah, and fascinating looking at that Discover Financial piece as well, where it's really helping identify that singular area that they can focus on to get the biggest impact in regards to the experience for its customers. So thank you very much, folks, for joining us for yet another Insight session. We're looking forward to producing these for 2023 and beyond. Hope you like the new format, and if you want to have a chat, I'm more than happy to talk to you about your individual bank and what you can do to improve your app experience.